Grace and peace. This is week 2 of Nefarious Characters, and my character today is Jezebel. So, Jezebel was the daughter of this wonderful priest king from this Phoenician city, but she married King Ahab from, of course, who was ruling Israel, and she we're just going to call her persuasive, shall we? Um, she convinced Ahab that this exclusive worship of the Hebrew God, Yahweh, was not something that really had to be all that. So it was okay if, we perhaps brought in this worship of some other kind of, let's call them nature gods, right? Baal. And everything kind of went cattywampus from that point forward. So Elijah, who was one of the main prophets from there, really had a bad issue with that. And he survived, but anybody that stood against our lovely Jezebel really didn't necessarily survive, because if they were not in favor of bringing in other gods, those prophets were killed. So Elijah was calling this into account, and he did prophesy a severe drought as a divine retribution. And he was right, of course. So he and the other prophets, Jezebel's prophets of Baal, had a one-off, if you will, trying to see who could bring fire. And of course, he won. And so then those prophets were slain. And Jezebel was furious. And so she was so furious, of course, that she wrote a letter. But the letter, of course, scared the heck out of the prophet, which is a story for another day, but tells you how powerful she was. And when Elijah came to himself, came back, and there was a confrontation, and this real last confrontation and these last pieces with Jezebel have to do with a vineyard, and it is worth reading in 1 Kings 21, because the owner of the vineyard was not going to give up this vineyard. And Jezebel set about lying about him and had him stoned to death because she's just so lovely. And Elijah confronted Ahab about this in the vineyard, and said that really all his heirs were going to be destroyed, and that good old Jezebel was going to be devoured by dogs. So a few years later, of course, Ahab did perish. And then there's some other little back and forth things that go on here having to do with Elisha, and is it Jezebel's son that's going to be a king, or this guy that Elisha appointed for being a king over Israel, and back and forth. Eventually, Jezebel gets thrown out of a window. And what do we discover? Well, we discover that before they can put her to her burial place, she's been devoured by dogs. What's the point of this narrative? Well, Jezebel becomes the archetype for evil women. And the bottom line of that story really having to do with worship the one true God. And I would say, truly, engage in reading in this story. There's a lot that happens in here having to do with how you stand for what is right, and what is true, and the lies that are told that in fact cannot stand on their own. Truth will always stand, and a lie will be devoured. Sometimes it takes time. These are great narratives in our Hebrew scriptures. Hope you have been enjoying them through the eyes of nefarious characters. Blessings to you.